Hey everyone, welcome back. You ever notice how life can just kind of throw you for a loop sometimes? Unexpected things happen and your mood can feel like it's all over the place.
It's totally normal to have ups and downs. That's part of being human.
Yeah, absolutely. But what happens when those mood swings become really extreme? I'm talking lasting for weeks, even months at a time.
That's where things can start to get a bit more serious, right? We might be moving into the realm of bipolar disorder.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today. We're going to explore the difference between those typical everyday mood shifts and the more intense, longer-lasting shifts that are a hallmark of bipolar disorder.
And it's important to clarify right off the bat, we're not just talking about, having a bad day or feeling a little extra happy.
Right, it goes way beyond that.
Bipolar disorder is characterized by these really dramatic swings between two distinct poles. Mania, which is a state of high energy, sometimes even euphoria, but also potentially really intense irritability. And then the opposite, a depressive phase, marked by very low energy, persistent sadness, and often a sense of hopelessness.
It's like cycling between these two extremes.
Precisely. And for this deep dive, we've been looking at a super interesting article called, well, the title translates to Bipolar Disorder is More Than Just Mood Swings. It's originally in German.
Yeah, but we've gone ahead and translated all the key points for you.
And while it does touch on the standard medical approaches to treating bipolar disorder, what we found really fascinating were the sections that explored these complementary natural strategies.
So our mission today is to unpack this article for you. We want to distill the most essential information about bipolar disorder itself. And then we'll really dig into these potential natural support methods that the article discusses.
We want to do this in a way that's really clear and easy to understand.
Right, no one wants to feel like they're back in school trying to decipher a complicated textbook.
Exactly.
So to kick things off, let's talk about bipolar disorder itself. One of the first things that jumped out at me from the article was just how much it emphasizes that bipolar disorder is so much more than just regular mood swings.
Absolutely. It's marked by these profound and lasting shifts, not just in mood, but in energy levels, activity levels, the ability to concentrate, and ultimately the capacity to manage everyday tasks.
It can really impact your entire life, from your relationships to your work.
Yeah, it's not something to be taken lightly.
Now, we've mentioned the two main poles of experience, mania and depression. But the article also clarifies that even within a manic episode, things aren't necessarily straightforward. Someone's mood can actually be quite volatile.
You're right. They might feel incredibly euphoric and on top of the world one minute and then suddenly become extremely irritable or even aggressive the next.
So let's break down what a manic episode actually looks like.
Okay, so the article defines a manic episode as a period of unusually elevated activity that lasts for at least a week. And this activity is clearly out of sync with the person's actual circumstances.
What are some of the key symptoms that we should be aware of?
Well, as we just mentioned, that rapid shift between intense euphoria and irritability or even aggression is a big red flag.
Got it.
Another hallmark is a drastically reduced need for sleep. Someone experiencing mania might feel fully rested after only a few hours of sleep, like maybe just 3 hours.
Wow, that's a tiny amount of sleep.
Right. They might also have this really strong urge to talk nonstop and to move around constantly.
I can imagine that would be pretty exhausting for the people around them.
Definitely. And then there's difficulty concentrating and a tendency to engage in risky behaviors.
What kind of risky behaviors?
Oh, it could be anything from going on wild spending sprees to having reckless sexual encounters. Some people might even find themselves impulsively reaching out to complete strangers.
Interesting. It's like their inhibitions are lowered somehow. Yeah, exactly.
Reading about these manic symptoms, it made me think about that feeling you get when you first fall in love. That rush of energy, the maybe staying up all night talking, the spontaneous decisions.
I see what you mean.
But the article makes a really clear distinction between those kind of experiences and a full-blown manic episode in bipolar disorder, right?
Right. The intensity, the duration, and the impact on your daily life are just on a completely different level with bipolar disorder.
And those early-stage relationship feelings tend to, naturally fade over time.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about mania. Let's turn our attention to the opposite end of the spectrum, which is those depressive episodes.
Yeah, and the article frames this really well. It describes depression as kind of the opposite of mania. Where mania is about excess, depression is a state of profound lack or deficit.
So if mania is like having the volume turned way up, depression is like having it almost muted.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
And these depressive episodes also last for a significant amount of time, at least 2 weeks, according to the article. And those 2 weeks must feel incredibly long and heavy when you're in that state.
Absolutely.
What kind of symptoms are we talking about here?
Well, the article lists a bunch of really difficult symptoms. There's the persistent depressed mood, of course, a loss of interest or pleasure in activities that you'd normally enjoy, a really draining lack of energy.
Ugh, I can't even imagine.
Changes in sleep patterns are really common too, either insomnia or sleeping way too much.
Makes sense.
And then there are feelings of guilt or worthlessness, pervasive self-doubt, and tragically, in some cases, thoughts of suicide.
That's so heavy.
It is.
It's really important to remember that bipolar disorder can be a very serious condition.
Yes, it is.
Now, something else the article touches on that I thought was really important was the issue of misdiagnosis.
Oh, or
It specifically mentions the difference between bipolar disorder and narcissistic personality disorder.
yeah, that can be a tricky one.
Can you explain that a bit more for us?
Sure. So people with narcissistic personality disorder can also have these really fluctuating emotional states. They might seem super confident and even grandiose at times, which could be mistaken for mania.
I can see how someone might make that mistake.
But then they can also swing in the other direction and become very depressed and down on themselves when they experience failure or criticism.
Right. That kind of makes sense. So what's the key difference then?
The big difference, as the article explains, is the underlying motivations and the overall pattern of these emotional shifts. In bipolar disorder, it's really about those distinct cyclical episodes of mania and depression.
I see. So in narcissistic personality disorder, those shifts are more likely to be reactions to specific external events.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's a really helpful clarification. Now, we've talked about the manic and depressive phases, but the article also gives some information about how long these phases typically last and what happens in between them.
Yeah, and it's important to understand that these phases aren't just constantly blending into each other. They occur in these distinct stretches of time that are called episodes. And between these episodes, there can be significant periods where a person experiences no symptoms at all and can function perfectly normally in their daily life.
That's good to know. It means there's hope for periods of stability and well-being.
Definitely.
What about the typical duration of these episodes if they're left untreated?
So the article says that untreated episodes usually last somewhere between 4 and 12 months. But it also mentions that they can be much shorter, lasting just a few days. Or, in some rarer cases, they can go on for much longer.
So there's quite a bit of variation.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a clearer picture of what bipolar disorder looks like.
Sure.
Let's dive into what the article suggests might actually cause it.
Okay, so the article is really clear that bipolar disorder is likely what's called multifactorial. That means it doesn't have just one single cause. It arises from this complex interaction of a bunch of different factors.
Like what?
Well, like someone's genes, any stressful life events they've been through, and their overall level of stress.
So it's nature and nurture both playing a role.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, when it comes to the genetics, a lot of people wonder, is there a strong hereditary link? Like, if your parent has bipolar disorder, are you automatically doomed to develop it yourself?
So the article makes it clear that while genetics definitely play a role, it's not a simple, direct inheritance situation.
Meaning it's not like inheriting eye color.
Right. Having a parent with bipolar disorder does increase your risk, but it doesn't guarantee that you'll develop it too.
Okay, that's good to know. What about other mental health conditions? Does having a parent with any mental health condition increase the risk for the child?
The article suggests that it might. Children of parents with mental health conditions, in general, might be at an increased risk of developing various mental health issues, including bipolar disorder.
That makes sense.
And it's not just about the genes themselves either. The article goes on to talk about how certain parental behaviors and life circumstances can also significantly influence a child's likelihood of developing mental health problems.
This was a really interesting part of the article for me. Like, what are some of the specific factors they mention?
Well, they talk about things like major relationship problems between the parents. So, frequent arguments, early separation, or divorce.
Right. Those are huge disruptions for a child.
Exactly. Tragically, experiencing abuse, whether it's sexual abuse or domestic violence within the family, also plays a significant role.
Of course, those kinds of traumatic experiences can have lasting impacts.
Absolutely. Then there are the social and economic stressors,
Like what?
like parental unemployment, frequently having to move, if the parents struggle with substance abuse. Even things that might seem less directly related, like having really irregular daily routines, inconsistent sleep schedules, or if the parent themselves is struggling with a physical illness, especially one that involves hormonal changes that affect their behavior, those can all have an impact on a child's mental health development.
It really paints a picture of how all these different factors can come together to create a more vulnerable environment for a child.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about some of the potential causes. Let's shift gears now and talk about how bipolar disorder is traditionally treated.
Okay.
What does the article say about that?
So when it comes to those really acute episodes, the intense manic or depressive phases, the article mentions the use of mood stabilizers,
Like what?
medications like lithium, carbamazepine.
Okay.
They might also prescribe antipsychotics, antidepressants, and sleeping pills.
All to try to regulate those extreme mood swings.
Exactly.
But the article is also pretty upfront about the limitations of these medications, right?
Yeah, it definitely doesn't sugarcoat it. The article points out that these medications don't work for everyone, and even when they do help, they often come with a whole bunch of side effects.
That's a bit concerning.
Yeah. The statistics they cite are pretty sobering. Less than half of the people taking these medications actually report a significant, lasting improvement in their symptoms.
Really? Less than half?
Yeah, and around 50% end up stopping their medication because the side effects are just too much.
What kind of side effects are we talking about?
Oh, there's a whole range. Some people experience tremors, significant weight gain, thyroid problems.
A tough decision to make, weighing the potential benefits against those risks.
Absolutely.
Now, the article also talks about psychotherapy as a treatment option.
Right.
What's its role in managing bipolar disorder?
So it seems like psychotherapy is often seen as more of a complementary approach, especially for people who are in a relatively stable phase of the illness. The main focus of therapy tends to be on preventing future episodes.
Okay, so kind of like equipping people with tools to manage their condition better.
Yeah, exactly. So they might work on stress management techniques, getting their sleep and daily routines more regulated, addressing any interpersonal conflicts that could be triggering their symptoms, and learning to recognize those early warning signs that an episode might be coming on.
That sounds really helpful. Being able to catch things early could make a big difference.
Definitely.
Okay, so we've covered some of the limitations of traditional treatments. Now, this is where the article gets really interesting for us. It starts to explore these natural alternatives, these complementary approaches.
Right.
And before we go any further, it's super important for you, our listeners, to remember that this information is coming straight from the article that we're discussing. Any decisions about your treatment plan should always be made in consultation with your own doctor or therapist.
Absolutely. This is not a substitute for professional medical advice.
We're just sharing what the article has to say. Okay, so with that disclaimer out of the way, let's dive into some of these natural approaches. The article starts by talking about amino acids.
Oh.
It suggests that people with bipolar disorder might be more vulnerable to mood swings if they have deficiencies in certain amino acids or other micronutrients.
Yeah, that's kind of the general idea that the article puts forward.
Right, and it gets more specific and talks about some particular amino acids that have been studied in the context of bipolar disorder.
Like which ones?
Well, they start with three that are often grouped together: leucine, isoleucine, and valine. These are called branched-chain amino acids.
Right.
And the article highlights a couple of studies that suggested these branched-chain amino acids might actually lead to a pretty rapid improvement in symptoms, particularly during those acute manic episodes.
Wow, that's interesting. How do they think those amino acids are working?
So the article proposes that they might be influencing the production of two important neurotransmitters in the brain, norepinephrine and dopamine.
Okay. And those are often elevated during manic episodes, right?
Exactly. So the idea is that by modulating those neurotransmitters, the branched-chain amino acids might help to reduce the intensity of the mania.
That makes sense.
And one of the studies that the article mentions actually showed some pretty quick results.
Oh, yeah. How quick are we talking?
Well, this study involved 25 participants with bipolar disorder who were in the middle of an acute manic episode. And after having a drink specifically formulated with these three amino acids, they saw a significant decrease in the severity of their symptoms within just 6 hours.
6 hours? Wow, that is fast.
Right. It's pretty impressive.
What was the dosage they used in that study?
So they used a total of 60 grams of these amino acids per day.
60 grams. That seems like a lot.
It is. And they split it into a specific ratio, 3.3.4. So 18 grams of leucine, 18 grams of isoleucine, and 24 grams of valine. And they did this for a whole week.
Wow, that's intense. Can you get that much just from food?
That's a great question. The article does say that you can find leucine, isoleucine, and valine in foods like lentils, white beans, peas, peanuts, cashews, things like that. But it's pretty clear that you're unlikely to hit those really high dosages just through diet alone.
So you probably need supplements to get that much.
Yeah, most likely. And the article is very clear that if you're considering taking supplements at those kinds of doses, you absolutely need to talk to your doctor first.
Makes sense. It's always better to err on the side of caution.
Exactly. Okay, so that's leucine, isoleucine, and valine. The next amino acid the article focuses on is N-acetylcysteine.
N-acetylcysteine, that's a mouthful.
It is. It's also known as NAC.
NAC.
Okay. And this one is interesting because it seemed to be particularly helpful for the depressive phase of bipolar disorder.
Oh, so a different amino acid for a different phase of the illness.
Yeah, exactly. And they did a double-blind, placebo-controlled study on this.
What did they find?
So they had participants take 1 gram of NAC twice a day for 4 weeks. And this was in addition to their regular medications.
Got it.
And the group taking the NAC, they saw a significant decrease in their depressive symptoms after just a few weeks.
So some promising results there.
Yeah, definitely something to consider. But again, always talk to your doctor before trying something like this.
Absolutely.
Okay, the last amino acid that the article delves into is L-tryptophan. And this one is interesting because the article proposes that a low intake of L-tryptophan in your diet might actually increase your vulnerability to mood swings, especially those associated with depression.
And I know L-tryptophan is important for making serotonin, right?
Exactly. It's a precursor to serotonin.
Which is that mood-boosting neurotransmitter that everyone's always talking about.
Right. And the article even mentions a study that was done on people with general depression, not specifically bipolar disorder. And they found that L-tryptophan actually helps reduce their symptoms and was even as effective as some of the commonly prescribed antidepressants.
Wow, that's amazing.
It is. And then, get this, the article also mentions studies looking at L-tryptophan in the context of manic episodes. And they found that a 2-week intake of L-tryptophan also led to a significant reduction in manic symptoms in people with bipolar disorder.
So it might be helpful for both poles of the experience.
Yeah, potentially. But here's the thing. The dosage they used in that mania study was super high, like 12 grams of tryptophan per day, combined with 4 grams of nicotinamide, which your body turns into vitamin B3.
Yeah.
And they had the participants split that into 4 separate doses throughout the day.
Okay, so we're talking about some pretty serious doses here.
Yeah, definitely not something to mess around with without medical supervision.
Right, you can't just go popping pills without knowing what you're doing.
Exactly. Now, in terms of getting L-tryptophan from your diet, you can find it in things like millet, oatmeal, lentils, beans, cashews, peanuts. But again, the article emphasizes that you're not going to hit those high, potentially therapeutic dosages through food alone.
Makes sense.
Okay, let's move on from amino acids and talk about something a little different. Omega-3 fatty acids.
Oh, yeah, I've heard a lot about those. Aren't those the good fats that are supposed to be good for your heart and brain?
Exactly. And the article highlights those well-established benefits of omega-3s. They're anti-inflammatory, they're good for your heart, they're important for brain function. But what's interesting is that the article connects them specifically to bipolar disorder.
How so?
Well, they talk about a study from way back in 2003 that found a correlation between higher levels of seafood consumption and seafood is a great source of omega-3s and lower rates of bipolar disorder.
That's intriguing.
It is. And then they go on to talk about the importance of having a good balance between omega-3s and omega-6 fatty acids in your diet.
Right, because those are the other kind of fats that we hear about, right?
Exactly. And the article proposes that if you have too much omega-6 and not enough omega-3, that imbalance might actually contribute to developing bipolar disorder.
Oh, wow. So it's not just about getting enough of the good fats. It's also about making sure you don't have too much of the not so good fats.
Yeah, it's about getting that ratio right.
Okay, I'm curious, where do we typically find those different kinds of fats in our diet?
So you find omega-6s in things like meat, dairy products, eggs, and certain vegetable oils like sunflower oil and pumpkin seed oil.
Okay.
Omega-3s, on the other hand, are mainly found in fatty fish like salmon, mackerel, things like that.
Got it.
You can also get them from plant sources like flaxseed, walnuts, hemp seeds. But there's a difference there.
What's difference?
So the plant-based omega-3s are mostly what are called short-chain omega-3s, whereas the ones found in fatty fish, those are the long-chain omega-3s. And the long-chain ones are thought to be more effective for mental health.
Interesting. So if you're looking to boost your omega-3s for mood support, fatty fish is the way to go.
It seems like it. But the article does acknowledge that there are growing concerns about overfishing and pollutants in fish, so they suggest algal oil as a good alternative.
Algal oil.
Yeah, it comes from algae, and it's a good source of those long-chain omega-3s.
Okay, good to know.
All right, moving on. The article then spends some time talking about the importance of vitamins and minerals.
Yeah, those are essential for so many bodily functions, right?
Exactly. And the article starts by emphasizing that if you're not getting enough of certain vitamins and minerals, it can lead to a whole bunch of problems.
Makes sense.
And then they tie this specifically to bipolar disorder by suggesting that if you're already predisposed to the condition, not getting enough of certain nutrients could potentially make your mood swings more severe or more frequent.
Interesting. So it's kind of like adding fuel to the fire.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, what kind of vitamins and minerals are we talking about here?
Well, they start by talking about the specific micronutrient complex that was used in a couple of studies.
A micronutrient complex, like a multivitamin kind of thing.
Yeah, kind of.
Right.
But this one was pretty intense. It contained 36 different vitamins, minerals, and other nutrients.
Wow, 36. That's a lot.
It is. And the product they used was called EM Power Plus.
EM Power Plus. Okay.
And the studies they mentioned had some pretty astonishing results.
Really? Like what?
Well, in these studies, the participants took a really high dose of this supplement.
How high are we talking?
They took 8 capsules 4 times a day.
Whoa, that's 32 capsules every day.
I know, right? It's a huge amount.
So what happened?
Well, the article says that the 11 participants who stuck with this regimen for at least 6 months saw a significant reduction in their mood swings and other symptoms.
Wow.
And get this, over half of them were actually able to reduce or completely stop taking their regular psychiatric medications.
That's incredible. Are there any side effects with taking that much of the supplement?
The only one they really mentioned was mild nausea, but it seems like that was mostly a problem if people didn't take it with food.
Okay, but still, 32 capsules a day.
Right, it seems like a lot to manage. And the article does bring up some concerns about that really high dosage. It points out that while the individual amounts of each vitamin and mineral might not be that extreme when you're taking 32 capsules, it adds up to these really high daily intakes of certain nutrients.
Like what?
Like they specifically mention folic acid, calcium, magnesium, selenium, iodine, and they say that these levels would be considered very high even in orthomolecular medicine, which is all about using nutrients in higher doses for therapeutic purposes.
So it's potentially risky.
Yeah, especially if you're doing it long-term without really close medical supervision.
Makes sense.
And there's a practical side of things, too. The article says that a bottle of 120 capsules costs almost $70.
Okay.
If you're taking 32 a day, that means one bottle only lasts you, like, less than 4 days.
So it's pretty expensive.
Yeah, not to mention the hassle of swallowing that many pills every day. Okay, so while the idea of a broad-spectrum micronutrient approach is interesting, it seems like it needs a lot more research, and it's definitely something to approach with caution.
Definitely.
Now, the article also talks about some individual micronutrients that have shown some promise in research. So let's look at those, starting with magnesium.
Okay, magnesium. That's one I've heard of before.
Yeah, it's a really important mineral.
Yeah.
And the article mentions a study that was done on 9 people with severe rapid cycling bipolar disorder.
Rapid cycling. What does that mean?
It means they experience really frequent mood swings, cycling between mania and depression more quickly than usual.
Got it.
So in this study, they gave these patients a specific type of magnesium supplement called Magnesio-Card.
Magnesio-Card.
Yeah. They had them take 2 sachets of it per day, and each sachet contained 243 milligrams of magnesium.
Okay.
And what they found was that in about half of these patients, the magnesium seemed to be just as effective as lithium, which is a standard mood stabilizer medication.
Wow, so magnesium might actually be a viable alternative to some of those conventional medications.
That's what the study suggests, yeah. But the article also mentions that not all forms of magnesium are created equal. Some forms, like magnesium citrate, can cause digestive issues if you take too much.
Makes sense.
So they recommend sticking to better tolerated forms, like the Magnesio-Card that was used in the study, or magnesium malate.
Good to know.
And they point out that other research has also shown some benefits of magnesium for various aspects of bipolar disorder.
Interesting.
There's another study they mentioned that looked at magnesium oxide specifically for manic symptoms.
Magnesium oxide.
Yeah. And they found that a daily dose of 375 milligrams of magnesium oxide, taken along with regular medications, led to a significant reduction in manic symptoms compared to a placebo.
Wow, so more evidence for magnesium.
Yeah, seems like it could be a helpful addition to a treatment plan.
Definitely worth looking into.
Okay, the next micronutrient on the list is folic acid. It's also known as vitamin B9.
Folic acid, yeah, that's the one that's important for pregnant women.
Exactly, but it's important for everyone, really.
Right, of course.
And the article describes a study where they had 75 people who were already taking lithium for bipolar disorder, and they gave them either 200 micrograms of folic acid per day or a placebo for a whole year.
Okay.
And the group taking the folic acid, they experienced significantly fewer depressive symptoms than the placebo group.
That's pretty cool. And 200 micrograms doesn't seem like a huge amount.
It's not. And the article actually says that you can get that much folic acid just from your diet. They recommend foods like peas, lentils, white beans, chickpeas.
Oh, so you might not even need a supplement.
Exactly.
That's great news.
It is. Okay, then there's a brief mention of something called methylene blue.
Methylene blue? Is that the stuff that turns your pee blue?
That's the one. It's actually a medication that's been used for various purposes for a long time, and we've actually done a whole separate deep dive episode on it, if you want to learn more.
I think I remember that episode. It was pretty fascinating.
It was. Anyway, the article suggests that methylene blue might have some potential as a complementary therapy for bipolar disorder, especially for those residual symptoms that sometimes stick around even after you've been on standard treatment.
Residual symptoms like what?
Well, they specifically mention depression.
So it might be helpful for people who are still struggling with depressive symptoms, even after trying medication and therapy.
Exactly. But the article stresses that you should always talk to your doctor before trying methylene blue, or any new treatment for that matter.
Of course.
Okay, next up is choline.
Choline. I don't think I've heard of that one before.
It's a nutrient that your body needs to make acetylcholine, which is an important neurotransmitter involved in all sorts of things, like nerve function, memory, emotions, mood.
Okay, so it plays a role in brain health.
Exactly. And the article describes a study that was done on 6 people with rapid cycling bipolar disorder. And they found that when these patients took choline, in addition to their lithium treatment, 5 of them experienced a really strong decrease in their manic symptoms.
Wow.
And 4 of them saw a significant decrease in their depressive symptoms.
So positive results for both mania and depression.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. But there's a caveat. 2 other participants didn't really respond to the choline, and the researchers think that might have been because those 2 individuals were also taking thyroid medication, specifically L-thyroxine.
Yeah.
And they believe that this medication might actually lower choline levels in the brain, which could explain why the choline wasn't as effective for those 2 people.
Interesting. So there might be some potential interactions to be aware of.
Yeah, definitely something to talk to your doctor about if you're considering taking choline.
Makes sense.
Oh, and one more thing about that study. The doses of choline they used were pretty high. They started with 2 to 4 grams per day, split into 2 doses,